Let me just make sure my audio is working. It is. All right. Hey, y'all. Welcome in. I'm Jeff Nowak. This is Inside Black and Gold, a podcast about a team that a lot of people seem to hate right now. Yeah, that's what I'm gonna go with. We're gonna dive in straight away. This is our Wednesday edition, so it's a bit quick. We're gonna go through the injury report. Then I'm gonna get into as many viewer questions as y'all have. Love to chat with y'all. So if you have any comments, questions, if you're watching, throw them in the chat and we'll get to them in the second segment. It's a bit of a time crunch today. So there will only be 2 segments and they will be bing, bang, boom out of here. But we're going to get to as much as possible. Don't want to bog anything down. So we're going to just get right into it again. If you have comments, questions, throw them in there. But as you can see, if you're watching this, and as you may know, the Saints-Panthers initial injury report is insanely long. there's 29 names on this list, and that doesn't even include one player who was sent to injured reserve today. And we'll talk about that in a second. But that is more than 25% of the Saints and Panthers rosters are currently listed on the injury report in some way, shape, or form. So, as you can probably imagine, this segment is going to be mostly that. We're going to dive into the injuries, what they mean, where we're at, and what you need to pay attention to going throughout the week. So, let's just start with the obvious. Derek Carr, the guy everyone loves to boo, whatever you want to say. I thought he played reasonably well in that game and before he got knocked out. But so we'll have to see what the Saints are going to do in terms of his availability. It sounds like if he can clear the concussion protocol, he will be good to play. The question is, can you clear the concussion protocol in a week? If you had asked me last week, I would have said most likely not. But then I saw Chris Olave go out and do exactly that. So clearly it is possible to clear the concussion protocol. You'd say, well, this is Derek Carr's second concussion in a month. And yes, but that was also Chris Olave's second concussion in a year. So what do you want to call that, right? Like either you clear it or you don't. Derek Carr was at practice today. He looked fine in terms of, there was no limitations. You're talking about rib injuries. You're talking about a shoulder injury. It's the same shoulder injury we've been talking about all year. The rib injury was initially reported as a back, but it's a rib injury. And as if anyone's familiar with human anatomy, you got ribs in the front and the back. So you can mess with both of them, right? So though that doesn't seem to be an issue, I'm sure he's going to be wearing a flak jacket if he plays. But that's the question right now: is can Derek Carr be available? We talked about this on Monday in Monday's episode. Dennis Allen was asked, how is this different from, the issue with Jameis last year, where you were like, okay, he's dealing with way too many injuries. We're going to sit him down for Andy Dalton. And he said, it's a completely different situation. It's a completely different situation. And I'm the direct quote again. He said it. I'm pretty sure he said it 3 or 4 times. It's a completely different situation. It's not a completely different situation. Like, I think we can all accept that this is a very similar situation. But I would say it's closer to week 3 than it would have been in week 2 in terms of where you were at with Jameis. But all we can do is ask the question and he's going to answer however he sees fit. And it's pretty clear that based on what he said today, based on what DA said today, if Derek can clear the concussion protocol, he'd be good to go. One thing that I was curious about that I still don't have a clear answer on is whether the concussion protocol changes at all when you go into it for a second time within a certain time frame, a month, 2 months, whatever. From my understanding, it doesn't. From my understanding, there are 5 steps you have to clear, and those steps are the same as they would be 2 weeks ago compared to today. The only real difference is whether the doctors are a bit more cautious with, if they're on the fence about something, they'll probably lean the other way than you would be, in the initial kind of status check. So it's going to be something to watch. Either way, he was out there today. This was kind of the, that Wednesday practice is important. If you are going to be able to get back in 1 week, then you probably have to be practicing on that Wednesday because you have to get through a full practice and you have to be cleared. Derek did not get through a full practice today. He was limited. So if he is unable to get in a full practice on Thursday or Friday, he won't be able to go. But as of right now, it feels like you are on track. So moving on. There's a lot of names on this list, so we're going to go through them one by one and talk about them. Defensive end. Let's go through actually the DNPs first. There was 7 DNPs, one of whom was defensive tackle Malcolm Roach. He got a knee injury late in the game. He left. He's now on injured reserve, so he will not be returning. Dennis Allen said on Monday that it's probably an injury that's going to require surgery. So I think you're going to not see him the rest of the way. Even if he did return, it would be for week 17. Marcus May is another safety. He is on this he is not on this list, but he did not participate. He has also been added to injured reserve. They have been replaced on the roster. At least their spots have been replaced on the roster. And these are names that you will not know unless you're a big Titans fan here. So they claimed Monty Rice, a linebacker off the Titans. He was waived by the Titans. The Saints claimed him. So that's another depth linebacker, and it probably is a good indicator that Pete Werner might still be a week away at minimum if you're adding linebackers to the roster. The other guy was PJ Mustafa, who they signed off the Broncos practice squad. I don't anticipate either guy will make a huge impact, but those are 2 new names that we're going to keep track of on the roster. So they are filling the spots of Malcolm Roach and Marcus May. All right. So let's go through the other 6 players who did not participate. That includes defensive end Isaiah Foskey. He's dealing with that quad injury again, and that's frustrating to me because he was not on the injury report last week. So that means that he has suffered some sort of re-aggravation of that quad, and so you're dealing with it again. I don't know. It's tough to say whether he's going to be able to come back and play, but anytime you miss a couple weeks with an injury and then you get through it and you get back and you get listed again with that same injury on the next injury report, it's obviously suboptimal at best. So defensive end's already a position you're limited at. Cam Jordan played in that game, but he was very limited. So you're going to have to figure it out. Peyton Turner still has not returned to practice, even though he is eligible to do so. I was halfway expecting that to happen this week. Maybe next week. Either way, he's dealing with that turf toe injury, so it's going to take him a little while to get back. So no update there. The other, Cam Jordan, as I mentioned, he did not participate. He's still dealing with that ankle injury. Running back Kendre Miller, also dealing with an ankle injury. We haven't seen him in several weeks. Again, frustrating rookie player. You want to see more out of him, but nothing you can do with an ankle injury. Wide receiver Rashid Shaheed, dealing with that thigh injury, did not practice again, but Dennis Allen did say that he is getting closer. He is progressing, so maybe he's able to get back to practice this week and give the Saints offense a shot in the arm against the Panthers. We'll have to wait and see. The only other player, quarterback Taysom Hill. This is one that kind of surprised me. We talked to Taysom after the game. He didn't have any clear issues in terms of what he was dealing with, but he was listed on this injury report as with a foot and a left hand injury. When it's a quarterback or a kicker, you have to specify which limb, in case you didn't know that. When you're talking about a quarterback's hand, shoulder, you will actually learn left versus right. And any other position other than a kicker's leg, you don't actually have to designate. So that's kind of a funny thing about the injury report. If you're talking about a quarterback, it's his left hand, which means it's his non-throwing hand. If Cam Jordan had a hand injury, it would just say hand. You would have to guess. Anyway, quarterbacks, you don't have to guess. So that's obviously important. Taysom Hill has been a huge piece of this Saints offense. And particularly if you're going into it without Derek Carr, you'd want to have that available to you. And, we'll have to see over the next couple of days. Taysom Hill's a tough guy. I'm more concerned with the hand injury than I am the foot injury, because we've already seen that Taysom is susceptible to fumbles. He's been used more in the passing game. If you can't catch, and that's clear, and you're limited in that way, then it just, the benefit of having Taysom is he's always on the field and you don't know what he's going to do. Well, if he can't catch, then that obviously limits what you can do with him. So that'll be one to watch, but I expect Taysom to be out there. A couple others, as we've mentioned previously, tight end Jimmy Graham, rest day. Right tackle Ryan Ramczyk, rest day. So that's nothing new. Jimmy Graham actually played this past Sunday, so we can't complain that he's getting a rest day after not playing, but he's getting a rest day. Maybe this next week he will play more than 3 snaps, and we can all talk about why haven't they been doing this the whole time? Because every time he gets on the field, he catches a touchdown. Anyway, The other one, tight end Juwan Johnson, also dealing with a quad injury. He was limited. Now, I don't know. I don't know what's going on with Juwan. He was dealing with a calf injury early in the season. He really has not been effective, and now he's on the injury report with a quad issue. It's tough. It's tough to really evaluate what he's done this year. But it does, this is a different topic for a different day. But you look at the Saints and you look at them getting torn up week after week after week after week by these athletic move tight ends. And then you see the Saints and you're like, why can't we do that? Why can't we get in on that action and get some tight end production? Hopeful. I mean, I'm hopeful. I still believe in Juwan. I still believe that Juwan can get it done. You can't have drops, right? It's like you talk about having trust in a receiver. Well, one very quick way to lose the trust of your quarterback is have a ball hit you in the hands and not only not catch it, deflect it up for an interception. Like a drop would have been just as bad there in terms of like losing the confidence of the quarterback. But like you didn't just not catch it, you created points for the other team, and that's just brutal. So we'll have to see with Juwan. Foster Moreau is obviously available at the tight end position, but you want Juwan out there. Center Eric McCoy and tackle Andres Peat both dealing with shoulder injuries. These are both injuries that they dealt with last week. So if they didn't miss last week's game, they will not really be at risk to miss this week's game. Sorry, I have a dog who's making all sorts of noise. The dog wanted to be in here when I started, even though I told her, I was like, hey, you probably want to stay out there. Well, now there's someone else home and she wants to get out of the room, but I'm talking to y'all. So we're gonna sit here for a couple more minutes and she's gonna relax. Yeah, relax. Okay, getting back to it. Offensive chat. Oh, we already talked about Ryan Ramczyk. Linebacker Pete Werner dealing with the shoulder oblique issue. He was limited today, but again, you went out and signed a linebacker off of waivers. If nothing else, that's an indicator that you are hedging your bets, that you may be, low in terms of your numbers at linebacker. I thought Nephi Sewell had a very good day in terms of filling in for Pete Werner. You go back and watch the tape, and that really does stand out. He did struggle early on, but I thought he made a really good impact as that game wore on. So, again, I think I've said this, one of the things the Saints have done really well over the years is develop linebackers. It's part of the reason when you say, well, you're really going to pay Caden Ellis $9 million a year or $7 million, whatever it is. And you're like, yeah, but we found him in the 7th round out of Idaho. Why wouldn't we just go find another linebacker and develop them when we have a proven track record of doing that? And that was kind of my reasoning at the time. And then you see guys like Nephi Sewell step up and you're like, see, this is where you kind of need that. Either way, that's one. And then Blake Grupe is also listed on this injury report with a right groin issue, but he was a full participant. So those are the injuries, right? So you have 2 players go to IR, and then you have, oh man, I already lost count, 4, 8, 12, 15 players listed with injuries, or 13 players listed with injuries, 2 rest days. Not exactly what you're hoping to see going into week 14, but that's kind of just the NFL at this time of the year. It's crazy with injuries. There's only so much you can do to avoid them. This time of year, it's a lot of times it's when you play teams versus as opposed to which teams you play. And, this is obviously the time the Saints need wins. They cannot afford to lose any more games, and they're going to have to do it without some playmakers. So we'll have to watch that. On the Panthers side, they have a lot of injuries as well, but only one player missed practice due to an injury. That was defensive end Deshaun Williams. He's dealing with a knee injury. The other 3, cornerback Troy Hill, offensive tackle Taylor Moton, and wide receiver Adam Thielen, these were all rest days, so you would anticipate that all those guys would be good to go. The rest, the other 10 names or so, are all dealing. We're all limited in practice. That's safety Von Bell with a shoulder injury, center Bradley Bozeman with an ankle injury, safety Jeremy Chin with a quad injury, offense outside linebacker, defensive end. Basically, it's a 3-4 defense now, so you have outside linebackers instead of D ends. You have D ends, but they're technically D tackles. It's a whole thing. But outside linebacker Yetur Gross-Matos, pass rusher, he's got a hamstring issue. Edge rusher Marquise Haynes Sr. dealing with a back issue. Cornerback J.C. Horn. So J.C. Horn and Jeremy Chin are both guys who missed a good chunk of this season. J.C. Horn, I don't believe, is out there in week 2. And the Saints will have to be dealing with them. They got back, and this makes a pretty effective defense, even for a 1-11 team. It's a solid defense, and it makes that group even better. So, they're going to have to do something. Cornerback J.C. Horn still limited with that hamstring. That was the injury that got him on IR, or at least a hamstring injury got him on IR, and he's still limited due to the hamstring. So, not a banner season for him in terms of health. Tight end Hayden Hurst dealing with a concussion. He was limited. Tight end Stephon Sullivan, former LSU guy, limited with a shoulder injury. Tight end Tommy Tremble, hip issue. He's limited. And outside linebacker Amari Barno, ankle. He was a full participant. So a lot of tight ends on this list, a lot of players on this list. The availability of a lot of these guys will be massive to watch going forward. But that's just, again, that's where we're at in this portion of the season, right? You're looking at starting quarterbacks. You're looking at starting wide receivers. You're like, okay, are you going to have them? Are you not going to have them? And that's a huge factor in these matchups. And frankly, this is a game that I think if you look at it from the Saints perspective, you better win. We can get all worked up about this, about that, about what the Saints should do, about moves they should make, about how the offense should run, about how Derek Carr should play. If you can't go out to your home stadium and beat a 1-11 football team, you can no longer pretend that I should take you seriously as a winning organization. I don't care who's healthy. I don't care what state your roster is in. I don't care what plays you have to call. This is a must-win game against a 1-11 football team. If you can't go out there and win, and really win convincingly, like, you should not allow this to come down to the wire the way it did last week for, I want to say, the Bucs, and they beat the Panthers. I think it was 21-18. That's not how you should be winning these games. You need to go out and prove to yourself and to your fans that they should take you seriously as an organization. Because right now it's hard to do that. Right now, you're looking at a team that goes out and lays an egg in the first quarter of a game and then decides, what, this is kind of embarrassing. Maybe we'll get this sorted out. Right? That's where this team is at right now. And that's what needs to change. And hopefully it can. But we're going to change topics here. Again, I'm Jeff Nowak. This is Inside Black and Gold. We just broke down the initial Week 14 injury report, 29 names total on it. One of those will be coming off. 2 of those will be coming off for the Saints and going to injured reserve. So it will be 27 as of tomorrow, assuming no more names get added. But all right, let's wrap up that segment. Again, the second segment, the last segment, will be a mailbag. So if you have any questions, comments, topics, hot takes, cat photos, whatever that you want to get into, throw them in the chat. I know you can't actually post a photo of your cat, but if you want to paste a link, then I'll go check it out. I'm all for cat photos. It's kind of, I love cats. I have 3 cats. It's too many cats, but I don't have much say in the matter. But anyway, this isn't a podcast about cats, but that might be more entertaining. Get your comments, questions in there. We will get to as many as possible in the back half of this program. Again, Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. You can check me out at Jeff_Nowak. We'll be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. I am Jeff Nowak. This is the live mailbag portion of the episode. So if you have any comments, questions, takes, whatever, throw them in the chat and we'll get to them. There's a handful of them in there now, but should be enough time to get to more than is in there. So if you throw them in now, I will get to them. But let's just get into, this is a funny thing to me because, there's a lot of reasons to be mad at Derek Carr, I guess. Like if you don't like Derek Carr and you don't like how he's playing and you can criticize this and that and this and that. This text says free mind. And there's a couple of people in here who are saying the same thing. It says Carr be faking injuries, which, there are things to criticize Derek Carr about. Being tough is not one of them, right? Like Derek has been hit, right? These are real hits. These are brutal hits. And you can say that he has a role in taking them, but the fact of the matter is these are not, injuries that are just like, oh, poor baby, get him a water bottle and walk it off kind of injuries. Like if you watch that hit, Bruce Irvin, drove him into the turf. It's the exact, like that hit and the result of that hit is exactly why that's not a legal hit anymore. Like we'll watch NFL games and you'll see like a body weight tackle and they'll throw a penalty. It's 15 yards. And you're like, wow, that was soft, right? But like that knocked Derek out of the game for good reason. Like he was hurt. He dealt with a rib injury, messed with his shoulder, and he has a concussion. Like those are the type of hits that the NFL wants to get rid of because of that. He took a huge hit against the Packers and he went out with that shoulder injury. He actually didn't have a concussion in that game. And then he took another huge hit against the Vikings, and that was a legal hit. I think that was Danielle Hunter. Might be wrong. And go watch that hit back. You can see his head just snap back. And so, like again, I don't think the issue is like, man, he's not tough enough. I think, at a certain point you have to protect him from himself, right? Like you have to say, no, you are not playing at a high enough level and the injuries are playing a factor in that. It can't just be Derek says he's cool to play, so we're going to play him. There's got to be more to that conversation. And that's why DA kind of shutting that whole idea down immediately after the game felt weird because it's like, no, you're the health of your starting quarterback, the health of this person should be important. That should be a topic of conversation, not just it's a difference. Anyway, so no, I don't think Derek's faking anything. I think Derek is just as frustrated as everybody else in terms of, man, he's not a guy who gets hurt. Like he's only missed a handful of games in his NFL career due to injury. And I guess he hasn't technically missed a game yet this season due to injury. He's just missed a majority of the second half in multiple games, in 3 different games. And so, that counts in Derek's mind, and it counts in my mind as well. Trav 504 says that's crazy. Derek is already back at practice. Dude must be a mutant. I don't know if he's a mutant, but again, he's not a guy who's gonna sit out unless you make him. And that's my question is he going to, if he is healthy, if he does clear the concussion protocol, are you putting a guy out there who can play at a high enough level to have success, or are you just kind of caving to the whims of a guy who's too proud to not play a football game? And I don't know the answer to that. I'm not a team doctor. I don't get to watch the full practices. What I will say is that, he didn't look like a guy who, he didn't, the limitations aren't obvious. Like you're not, but it was the same thing in week 4. I watched him prior to the game and he was throwing fastballs. Like you could see he had the arm was there, but then you watch the game and you're like, some of these throws are just, you can see where the shoulder is probably having an effect. And he's been dealing with this all season. I don't know how much of this season you can look at and say, well, the shoulder is affecting him in these certain areas. Like, I don't know. All I know is that you don't go out with the same injury 3 times and have it be, well, that wasn't affecting him prior, right? Like this is an injury that he has been dealing with all year. Whether he can play through it and whether it's there are 2 different questions. And so that's just something you're going to have to watch. Snakebite says, I think he should sit out, and that's fair. We'll see. the dark side. I think this is a Raiders fan who's here, which cool. I don't have a problem with that. He says Carr is 2 for 2 on TDs to Jimmy in the red zone. The problem is that the first TD was in week 3, and for some reason Pete hasn't used Jimmy in the red zone for 8 straight weeks until week 13. Guys, I'm on board. I agree. I think it's ridiculous. And it's like we've asked this question because why isn't Jimmy Graham used more, right? And there's just no answer. It doesn't make sense. But there's another one in here that says it's probably has something to do with an injury. There's no injury. Jimmy's not dealing with an injury. Jimmy is perfectly fine. He's just not playing. It's inexplicable. I don't understand it. But it's even in that game, he only played 3 snaps. He got a touchdown. I think it's just like they have a very limited package for what they're going to do with Jimmy Graham throughout a game. And you go through the calculus of every week, okay, we can only have 48 players active. And every week you're making some sort of difficult decision in terms of, okay, who are we making inactive versus who are we not? And you're looking at it and saying, well, this guy contributes on special teams, right? This is a backup linebacker. We need the backup. This is a backup running back. We needed what happens when the running back. And then inevitably you get to the point where you're like, okay, well, Jimmy's only going to do these very specific things. So if we're having someone be inactive, that's who it's going to be, right? And there are points throughout a season where you look at the inactive list and it's 5 to 7 injured players. You're not talking about, okay, pick one or the other. And the Saints, throughout much of this season, have had pretty good health. And you haven't had injured players completely filling up the inactives. This past week, you pretty much did. Like you're talking about Nick Saldiveri, guys like that, and then injured players. And that's how Jimmy got on the field. So we'll see. I mean, what I will say for that game is like Jimmy was only used once, but they did do a very good job in the red zone in that game. One thing that DA talked about that I think is actually a good point. And, DA a lot of times will just say stuff, and occasionally you'll get a coaching point that kind of filters through that no one asked for that actually is an interesting thing, which in this case, it's that the Saints kind of identified as they looked at the red zone that when they're struggling in the red zone, when they're struggling to convert in the red zone, it's because they get kind of bogged down from the 20 to the 5, right? But when you go inside the 5, when you look at their success rate once you get inside the 5, it's very high. They've done a very good job. This is a team that when you're in the red zone has been effective in short yardage, whether that's Taysom Hill, whether that's Tony Jones Jr., right? Whether that's Alvin Kamara, that's where you've scored the bulk of your red zone touchdowns. And so you look at how week 13 went, right? Well, what is the common denominator outside of that Jimmy Graham touchdown? That was, I'd have to look, but it was not from inside the 5, right? But the other 3 touchdowns, right, was 2 Alvin Kamara runs and a Taysom Hill run. They were all 1 to, I think 2 of them were 1-yard touchdown runs. One of them was a 2-yard touchdown run, right? And so it's like you're trying to find the solution to how you get better in the red zone. And I do think that that's a good coaching point. And it's something that it's like you can say, well, yeah, it's obvious. Get inside the 5. Everyone wants to be inside the 5. But you look at how they operated in the red zone in the games they struggled in the red zone. Go look at the Jags game when they had a chance to go score a touchdown and tie the game. And they had 4 shots at it. You know where they took those shots from? The 6, right? In the Texans game. They had it inside the red zone. It might have been the 24-yard line. I can't remember. But like they were at the fringe of the red zone. And instead of trying to get close and get to the goal line and finish it off, they were going for it all on every play. And to me, that's an adjustment that you make that is actually effective. So like, I think as you look at it and as you see this offense try to adjust to that, I think that was a good adjustment. And I think it's a good observation. And, as long as you can take advantage of it, that's great. And if you can continue to make life miserable on teams at the goal line, I'm okay with it, right? So anyway, like I thought the red zone, that like you look at things from this game, this awful, no good, very bad game where you went down 21-0 and everything seemed terrible. And so what are you pulling out of that? Well, going forward, if you can be as efficient in the red zone or even not even 100%. If you can be 75% or 50% in the red zone, you win a lot more of these games. You beat the Falcons if you're 50% in the red zone. So that's kind of what you're looking at. And this team knows that if it can win its final 5 games, you get to 10 wins. And so you look at it. Now, I don't know why you would assume they'd win their final 5 games, but that's how this team is going to operate. They're not going to look at it and say, well, we're done. We can't get anywhere. They're looking at it and saying, okay, we figured something out here and let's continue to get better at it. The issue is, you lost your quarterback. So there's only so much you can do there. Jerry G says start Jameis or Jake. And, I do think it's interesting in terms of, I don't think they're considering starting Jake Haener right now. And I think that's fair because, like Jameis has been there. And if you are looking to start somebody, it should be the guy who you brought in to start meaningful games. If these games stop being meaningful, if you lose to the Panthers and you lose to and suddenly you're 2 games back of the Falcons without the tiebreaker in hand, I think it's time to play for the future. And I talked about it on Monday. I was probably premature in the idea of like, okay, week 13, week 14, this is when you should start doing that. But at a certain point, you have to. But right now, I don't get the indication at anywhere that they're considering starting Jake Haener. Maybe someday, but not. I don't think it's something they're really looking at this week. KD says if we had better coaching, they'd either put Carr in better position to win, like more play action, or they would just start somebody else. Yeah, I mean, the play action, it's funny because when you talk to Pete, you ask him what is kind of what is one of the founding principles of this offense, and he will tell you play action and play fakes, and they just don't do it very often. Part of that is they have not been able to establish the run in order to do it. Like running a play fake just to run a play fake isn't really that beneficial if no one's going for the play fake. Right when you're down 21-0, I don't think the Lions are going to be like, oh yes, we got to sell out to stop the run, right? So your play fake really isn't having much effect. But no, I do think that is something that they should look at in terms of just doing it more frequently and more effectively. Goonie 300 says AK 41 injuries say a lot about coaching. I don't know about that. I just think Alvin Kamara is a guy who's going to tell you what he feels, and he's going to be honest with you regardless of how that makes other people appear. And I don't say that as a negative. I say that it's like you just have to appreciate, like you have to understand what he's saying and understand where it's coming from. And it's like I have never gotten the impression from Alvin that he is kind of sub-commenting, if you will, like you talk about subtweeting, that Alvin is trying to undermine what the coaches are doing. People like to infer that upon his statements. And to me, it's all coming from a positive place. It's coming from everyone's pulling in the same direction kind of place. But he's just so blunt about it that people take it to another level. Like Chris Olave was asked if the booing was warranted in the game, and he kind of had this smirk on his face. And I've said this before, like the amateur behavioral psychology on Twitter is so annoying because it's like you don't know. You're just people are like, "Ooh, he must think that it was," and he responded, he was like, "I just didn't know what you meant by warranted." He didn't know what it meant, and so like he was just awkward, and he smiled in that moment, and so. Like I get tired of that. Like listen to what they are saying. Don't pretend to understand what the body language means. Either you I don't know why I get so annoyed by that, but it's just like, who are you? You're either someone says something or they don't. The idea that that they're thinking something else because they make a face or it takes them a second to answer a question. That's just like, that's so toxic. It really is. David GRG says, just bashing Derek is not fair. My point would be coaching where DA has failed many times to hold people accountable. Wherever Derek has been hurt, we have lost that game. Yeah, well, I will say, like, the 2 games Derek got hurt and they lost, I wouldn't put that on Jameis. I would put that on you were in a hole and there's only so much you can expect a backup quarterback to be able to do. I don't think that that Jameis necessarily put his best foot forward in certain elements of those games, right? Like I thought he had a really nice start against the Vikings, but then there was just two really bad interceptions that kind of eliminated your opportunities to come back there, right? You had two interceptions in the final 4 minutes of that game. That can't happen, right? So like, while I'm not gonna put that in, he's not the reason they were down 21 points, 24 points, right? So I'm not blaming him for not being able to come all the way back from that, because you basically write off the game at that point. The fact that they even had a chance was because he made some really, really spectacular plays in that game. The only one I'll put on him to an extent of like, man, one effective drive, and you put this game away, is the Packers game, right? Like, that's a game you should have won, but you weren't able to do it, right? Like, you weren't able to create offense. And yeah, I get it. Blake Griffin missed that field goal at the end, but that was after you allowed the Packers to score 18 points without any interference. So I don't know. Like, I do think the coaching at that point, like, the whole idea of keeping Jameis was so that he could go in and you wouldn't miss a beat. But it doesn't seem like it seems like the offense sputters in a lot of ways, not just with Jameis in the game. Like, it seems like the strategies that go into it, like the play calling, is weird. Like, it's like it doesn't seem like there's a plan when Jameis goes in. And that's not like a dig on Jameis. It's a dig on the coaching. It's a dig on the play calling. It seems like they're just like, Derek goes out and Jameis goes in, and they're just like, oh shit, we're done. Let's wave the white flag. We're just going to run these, kind of vanilla designs, and maybe we'll get lucky. Anyway, that's like, personally, you had plenty of time in that game. Like, that's what annoyed. Like, the passes didn't necessarily annoy me, because you knew Jameis was coming in cold, right? You knew that he wasn't going to be, like, on perfect synchronization with his receivers, because he doesn't work with them in the week. Like, this is not a situation where you're splitting reps in practice. Derek gets the QB1 gets the reps. So you're not, there's not a ton of rapport there, but you were running the ball. Like, you were running it down their throat. Why'd you stop? Like, you had a positive play on first down, and then you threw the ball 3 times from the 40. Like, you could have run it all the way down the field. I wanted them to run it all the way down the field. I wanted them to burn the clock down, because I didn't want to hand the ball back to the Lions with a score. But for some reason, you get into second and 6, and you make an incompletion. Then suddenly running is not an option, but that's 4 downs. So you should. And you can make the same argument against the Vikings that, like, the play calling did not adjust to this scenario of the game the way it should have. And I think the same thing happened there, where you just didn't, you got into your own head, and you're like, well, you got to throw it. No, you don't. Run the damn ball. Anyway, so we can continue. Oh crap, Jeff, be real on Jameis, Kivo says. What are you talking about? I mean, I think Jameis didn't play particularly well in that game. But again, it's like, your backup goes in, and you need to you need to play in a way that accentuates what he does well, not asks him to do stuff that he might not be able to do. And it's like, you have a running game that has worked and been effective. Like, run the ball, and then hit him with a hard play action, right? Like, if you don't. Anyway, well, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. The play calling is very, very, very questionable a lot of the time. Let's get to one more question here, one more good question, and then we will get on out of here. Let's Kivo. The media got a let off Carr. I do think that the focus on Derek not being good enough is probably missing the larger picture of, like, what did you expect to see versus what is happening, right? Like, what did you expect to be different in terms of using playmakers, in terms of the offense? And I do think that he has played well at points, and he has been inconsistent. And the problem is, that's kind of been the story of his career. And it was the story of that game. It was the story of week 13, right? Like, you saw a guy who, there was a couple drops, right? It wasn't perfect, but you also didn't see a guy make plays. Again, like I think being hypercritical of the A.T. Perry miss in terms of not throwing it to a wide open receiver and checking it down to the tight end. I think the idea that that's a problem is probably overplayed, but it's also not, it's just not playing quarterback at a high level in that moment. And I just think there's a lot of points in the game where you see that, but then you get into the second quarter and he locks in, and suddenly, he's throwing dimes. Like there were a couple throws in that game. You go back and you look at him like that's a freaking dime. Like that's a great throw. Like he made one to Foster. I think it was Foster Morrow. Maybe it was A.T. Perry. There was a couple, third and long conversions that you just laid it into the second level, and you're just like, okay, where has that been? And I don't know, like that's the only reason I look at it. I'm like, well, maybe we should boo him more off it, because like whether he wants to admit it or not, I think it kind of like, I think it got something. I don't know. I think he's the type of guy who operates at a higher level when he feels like people are shitting on him, right? Who people are not, when he wants to prove people wrong. I genuinely do. I just think that's just how some people are wired. So maybe being mean to him is the answer. Maybe DA needs to be mean to him. Tim Fabenro says, "Preach it, Jeff. How real can you be with these coaches? How do you, as a pro journalist, come up with better strategy than NFL offensive coaches?" Trust me, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm full of shit. But I mean, it's not that difficult to look back in hindsight and say you should have done this, right? That's an easy thing to do. That's the easiest analysis in the world. Is, well, that didn't work. You should have done something else, right? So, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I have any idea of how to scheme and come up with a game plan, but at a certain point, you just need to do the common sense things like run the ball. And I feel like at times offensive coordinators, and Mark Schlereth said this, we played Mark Schlereth's audio, I think last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, I can't remember, but he talked about this too. It's like, I think offensive coordinators at points try to overcomplicate things because they're like, well, I'm an offensive coordinator. I'm supposed to be smarter than them. I'm supposed to come up with these complex plans to fool the defense and to get guys wide open for huge plays. And sometimes the best answer is just run the freaking ball. Just run the ball. Run the ball. Kiva says, what if the game plan was to involve Juwan early? That is a good point. Yeah, and I think that's like, okay, what is the progression there is what should be being asked. Like, do you bail on a progression because the coverage busts somewhere that is not in the progression, right? Because the deep over comes open. Do you bail on the progression? And so I don't know what the progression was, and they're never going to tell us what the progression was. But I do think that is a play where you are like, it is designed for Juwan to block and then leak across the formation. And that's a play that works. Like, I love that play. And whether you should have bailed on it and gone to something else, that is the design for Juwan to leak out. And you've seen that, like, I think go back to the Saints Jaguars game. Teddy Bridgewater was the quarterback. So this is 2019. Jared Cook does that for like a 35-yard gain, right? Like he just blocks, leaks out. You find him in the flat and he runs. Now this play probably wasn't as high yield as that because of the defense, because the defense was, the strength of the defense was where you were going. And the weakness of the defense was where you didn't go. But it's the first play of the game. You don't know exactly how they're going to come out and approach that scheme, that defense. So I think if you saw that in the second quarter, in the third quarter, you do go to A.T. Perry. So I think that's probably undersold. It's just, you're looking for a reason. You're looking for reasons to say this quarterback hasn't done a good enough job. And frankly, there are a lot of things you can point to. And Derek has given people way too many excuses. But I do agree. I think that there's never enough nuance in the conversation of, okay, not perfect, right? I think like this is kind of how I approach it. So you want to grade decisions. And this is how like teams do it. They give grades. They don't say, well, you fucked this up, you fucked that up. No, they give you a grade. And they grade your decision making, and they look at missed opportunities. Did you go through the progression the right way? Did you make the right read? And so, like, I think when you look at that, you're like, okay, There is an A+ decision here. Not every play is going to have an A+ decision. Some are just going to have B decisions, C decisions. But this is an A+ decision to throw to A.T. Perry wide open, right? As he comes and as they bust the coverage and he comes open. Now, throwing to Juwan isn't an F decision. That's probably the B decision. That's probably like, you took the secondary option that was not the best option, but it's still a positive option. It's not a D option. It's not a mistake. It's just a lower yield option. And so that's where I think people get frustrated is you don't seem to be getting the A+ decision when there's an A+ decision to be made. You end up getting the B decision or the B- decision, where it's instead of a potential 20-yard gain, it's a 4-yard gain. It's 3 yards in a cloud of dust. Like Juwan wasn't going to break that for 20 yards, but it's probably a 5-yard gain on first down. And the problem is that's what you seem to be getting way too often when you're getting soft coverages and you're getting opportunities. So to me, that's kind of where I look at it and say, I want my quarterback to be able to find that A+ decision. I need him to be able to find that A+ decision when there's an A+ decision to be made. And in that case, there was, and it wasn't made. So that's the frustration for me. But again, it's not as simple as saying, well, this guy sucks. He can't get it done. Because there's a lot of quarterbacks who do this, who do that sort of thing, who don't make the perfect throw, who don't make the perfect read. And if like a perfect quarterback, if you can get your hands on a Pat Mahomes, right? If you can get your hands on a Drew Brees or a Tom Brady, fan-freaking-tastic. You take what you could get, right? And you try to win football games. You try to win as many football games as you can. That's kind of where the Saints are at right now. But all right, I'm Jeff Nowak. This is Inside Black and Gold. Thanks everyone for checking it out. If you liked what you see, if you want to hear more, go subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Again, just search Inside Black and Gold. We're on all the players. You'll find us. If you haven't subscribed here, go ahead and do that. Ring the bell. Appreciate all y'all. You can hit me up on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. And if you have any questions, comments you want us to get to in a podcast, feel free. We're going to have another episode coming at you on Friday morning. Going to get into, we talked to a lot of the players about about the booing, and I have some strong opinions on that, and we can get into more of that. In the Friday episode, we're going to hear from Mickey Loomis, who had some really weird things to say about the Lions fans being in the building and why he thinks that is. And so we'll get into that. And then we'll have a Panthers reporter come in and kind of give us the lowdown on what's been going on. So make sure to stay tuned for that episode. As always, again, thanks everyone for tuning in. Appreciate everyone who watches, everyone who leaves a comment. Everyone who leaves a comment, it's very, it always amazes me how many people show up and engage in these things, because I enjoy doing them. So it's nice to get that interaction. So appreciate y'all. We'll talking to you later in the week. Who dat? Go Saints. Be easy, y'all. Peace.